John stood at the edge of the crowded office, his eyes scanning the room as he sipped his lukewarm coffee. His tie felt a little too tight around his neck, and the collar of his shirt seemed to be strangling him. It had been a long week, filled with deadlines, meetings, and the ever-present pressure of keeping his job afloat. The office hummed with the low murmur of colleagues discussing their weekends, their laughter a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside him. Across the room, his wife Laura, or so he thought she was still his wife, sat at her desk, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. She looked up and caught his gaze, flashing him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was the office manager, and she had the kind of beauty that could make a man drop his wallet without realizing it. But lately, there was something about her that John couldn't put his finger on, a secret she was keeping, a glint in her eye that spoke of something more than just the end of a workday. "Hey, Johnny boy," she called out, her voice as sweet as the day they had first met. "How's your report coming along?" John forced a smile and replied, "Almost done, just tying up some loose ends." He watched as Laura's boss, Charles, emerged from his office. Charles was the epitome of success, tailored suits, a Rolex watch, and an air of arrogance that seemed to thicken the very air around him. He walked over to Laura, leaning down to whisper something in her ear. Laura giggled, her hand lightly touching Charles's arm. The sight of it sent a shiver down John's spine. The clock on the wall ticked away the last few minutes of the workday, and John found himself unable to concentrate on his work. He packed up his things, feeling like a detective who had just stumbled upon a clue that could unravel the fabric of his life. As they left the office, Laura looped her arm through his, her touch as cold as the winter wind outside. John knew something was wrong, something that went beyond the usual marital hiccups. But he had no idea just how deep the betrayal ran, how Laura and Charles had woven a web of deceit that was about to ensnare him in a twisted game of power, sex, and greed. Little did he know, his life was about to take a dark turn that would lead to a revenge so sweet, it would leave a bitter taste in their mouths for the rest of their lives. That evening, John sat in the quiet of their once happy home, the weight of the day's revelations pressing down on him like an invisible anvil. He couldn't shake the image of Laura's hand on Charles's arm, the intimate way they had spoken. The house felt like a prison, the walls closing in, whispering the truth he didn't want to hear. The following week, the tension grew thicker than the smoke in a crowded bar. Laura would come home late, smelling faintly of another man's cologne, and John's stomach would twist into knots. He'd pretend to be asleep, listening to the soft rustle of her clothes as she slipped into bed beside him, her body still warm from their illicit embrace. He could feel the distance between them growing, the unspoken words a chasm that threatened to swallow him whole. One evening, he found the courage to confront Laura. The words tasted sour in his mouth as he asked, "Are you having an affair with Charles?" Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and defiance. "It's not what it seems," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He said he'd ruin you, take everything if we didn't." John felt the blood drain from his face as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Laura had been coerced, her career and their marriage just pawns in Charles's sick game of power and control. The realization hit him like a freight train, but with it came an icy resolve. He wouldn't be anyone's cuckold, not even for the woman he once loved. He was going to take back what was his and destroy the man who had tried to make a fool of him. The plan formed slowly in John's mind, a masterstroke of vengeance that would leave no stone unturned. He'd use Charles's own arrogance against him, play into his sense of entitlement and superiority. He'd gather evidence, build a case, and when the time was right, he'd strike, not just to save himself, but to ensure Laura and Charles felt the full brunt of his wrath. It would take time, patience, and a cunning that he never knew he had. But as he sat in the darkened room, the taste of bile in his mouth, John swore he would make them pay. The next few months were a blur of late nights and early mornings, as John worked tirelessly to gather the ammunition he needed. He hacked into Laura's email, found hotel receipts and incriminating messages, recorded their late-night conversations, and even hired a private investigator to follow them. The evidence grew, a mountain of deceit that would crush Charles under its weight. And all the while, Laura remained oblivious to John's newfound determination, thinking she had him right where she wanted him, broken and powerless. But John had other plans. He was going to show them both, that he wasn't some pushover. He was going to take back his life, his dignity, and leave them with nothing but the tattered remnants of what they had tried to steal from him. And when the day came, when the truth was laid bare for all to see, John would revel in their downfall, the sweet victory of his ultimate revenge. He waited patiently, biding his time, as Laura continued her affair, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Every time she kissed him goodbye in the morning, every time she whispered sweet nothings in his ear, John felt the anger simmering just beneath the surface. But he remained calm, a silent observer in a play where he knew the final act by heart. Finally, the moment arrived. He had enough evidence to bring the house of cards tumbling down. He called Laura into the living room, where the walls were lined with printed emails, photos, and audio recordings. She paled when she saw the evidence, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "How?" she stuttered, her voice trembling. John's voice was cold, devoid of the love he had once felt for her. "You should have known better than to underestimate me," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "You played your game, now it's my turn." He presented her with a choice: confess and help him bring Charles down, or face the music alone. Laura, desperate to save herself, agreed to cooperate. Together, they approached HR with the damning evidence, and watched as the company's board of directors was notified of Charles's misconduct. The man who had once strutted through the office with the confidence of a peacock now found himself the subject of a full-blown investigation. The office buzzed with the news, and soon, Charles was called into an emergency meeting. His face was ashen as he emerged, the realization dawning on him that his reign of terror was over. Laura was fired, but John was offered a promotion, a slap in the face to the man who had tried to ruin him. But that was only the beginning. John had dug deeper, uncovering a trail of embezzled funds and illegal business dealings that led straight to Charles. He leaked the information anonymously to the press, watching as the story exploded into a full-blown scandal. The powerful CEO was now the laughingstock of the business world, his empire crumbling around him. The court battles were brutal, but John had prepared well. Laura was granted a small settlement, but Charles was left penniless. His assets frozen, his reputation in tatters, he was a man destroyed. And John? He walked away from it all with his head held high, his pride restored, and a newfound respect from his colleagues. As he packed up his office, John couldn't help but smile. The game was over, and he had won. But as he looked back at the empty space that had once held Laura's desk, a pang of sadness shot through him. The love they had once shared was gone, lost to the ashes of betrayal. Yet, as he closed the door on that chapter of his life, he knew that in the end, justice had been served, and he had reclaimed what was rightfully his. The divorce proceedings were swift and merciless. Laura, now with her lover's financial support gone, was forced to face the consequences of her actions. She had been caught in her own web, her greed and lust for power leaving her with nothing but a bruised ego and a future of regret. John took satisfaction in watching her squirm as their lawyers dissected their lives, laying bare the lies she had told. In the courtroom, Laura looked like a shadow of her former self, her eyes haunted by the realization of what she had thrown away. Charles sat beside her, his once confident demeanor replaced by a slumped posture and a defeated gaze. The judge ruled in John's favor, granting him a significant portion of their marital assets and leaving Laura with a fraction of what she had once thought she'd have. After the final papers were signed, John stepped into the elevator, feeling lighter than he had in months. He had taken his ultimate revenge, leaving Laura and Charles to wallow in the mess they had created. As the doors closed, he took a deep breath and felt the last of the anger slip away. It was time to move on, to build a new life from the ashes of the old. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. John threw himself into work, climbing the corporate ladder with a renewed vigor. He made new friends and even started dating again. Yet, every time he saw Laura's name in the paper, a small part of him felt a twinge of satisfaction. He had shown her that she couldn't toy with his life without paying a price. The power dynamic had shifted, and he was now the one in control. One evening, as he sat in his new apartment, sipping a fine scotch, John received a mysterious text message. "Meet me tonight, and I'll give you something that will make your victory complete." The sender was anonymous, but he knew it was Laura. He felt a mix of excitement and dread, Unsure of what she had up her sleeve, curiosity piqued, John agreed to the meeting. He arrived at the rendezvous point, a dingy motel on the outskirts of town, and found Laura waiting for him in the dimly lit parking lot. She looked tired, her makeup smudged and her eyes red-rimmed. In her hand, she held a USB drive. "Here," she said, her voice cracking. "This is everything you need to take down Charles completely. His entire network, his secret accounts, all of it. I've been gathering it since we last talked." John stared at her, his mind racing. Laura had come to him, willing to hand over the keys to the kingdom. He took the drive, knowing that with this information, he could not only destroy Charles but also ensure that no one else ever suffered the way he had. The final act of his revenge unfolded with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. Using the information Laura had provided, John anonymously tipped off the authorities to Charles's criminal activities. The once feared CEO was now a fugitive on the run, his empire in ruins. Laura had played her part in bringing him down, but the price she had paid was steep. John sat back in his chair, watching the news reports with a sense of detachment. Laura was now a pariah, shunned by her former friends and colleagues. But he knew she was safe, he had made sure of it. In the end, she had been a pawn in Charles's game, just like him. He couldn't forgive her, but he also couldn't bring himself to wish her harm. As he closed his eyes, John allowed himself a moment of bittersweet victory. He had taken his life back, but at what cost? The woman he had loved had become a mere shadow, and the trust between them had been shattered beyond repair. But he had survived, and he was stronger for it. The future stretched out before him, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with new colors. He took a sip of his scotch, feeling the warmth spread through his body. It was time to let go of the past and embrace the unknown. After all, the best revenge is living well, and John had every intention of doing just that.